24th, 2019 Parks and Recreation Commission to order. And I'd like to start with calling of the roll call.
Commissioner Cripps?
Here.
Commissioner Greenfield?
Here.
Commissioner Lemire?
Here.
Commissioner McCauley?
Present.
Commissioner McDougall?
Here.
Commissioner Moss? Commissioner Rechtel? Councilmember McCormick? Or Cormick?
You might just note for the minutes that I think that Councilmember McCormick is present. Correct all.
Are there any agenda changes, requests, deletions from the published agenda? One thing I will do with the agenda is there's a couple of items on here that are maybe 60 minutes, both the amendment to the park and the open space regulations. I will try and manage those to be 25 or 30 minutes. And once again, see if we can approach between 9:30 and 10 o'clock for an agenda. If there are no changes other than my timing suggestion, my TikTok, then I'd like to start with oral communications on subjects not on the agenda. And the first speaker would be Liz Gardner. And you'll have 3 minutes.
So I have a thumb drive. I don't know if we can put that in for just to kind of illustrate what's going on. It's the first two photos on. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Liz Gardner, and I'm a volunteer board member for the Palo Alto Little League. We're here tonight to ask the commission for permission to slightly alter the El Camino Real baseball infield line. Every year for the past 3 years, the National Little League has been shortening the date of birth when boys, or players, I should say, age out of Little League. And this has caused a larger number of players to be caught in an in-between stage of baseball. But thankfully, there's a level called 50-70, or even a little slightly higher level called 54-80 that has been created. So currently, Palo Alto baseball fields do not accommodate this necessary larger playing field for these in-between players. One park does have the flexibility to do so, though, and that's the El Camino Park. Yet the way it's currently configured with 10 feet of grass baseline, players have to actually kind of play on the grass. So what this does, it prohibits, or, yeah.
See if they can get the presentation up.
Oh, sure.
Everybody's distracted by
technology.
Everybody running around and looking at the screens.
No.
And so if you wait 1 minute.
Okay, is that going to detract?
And we'll see, we'll either do it or not do it, but
Okay.
But we're not all distracted by what's going on.
Okay, so should I start?
Just wait.
Okay.
While we're waiting, I should explain that I appreciate that you've come to ask, but this is not an agenda item. And in fact, we can't logically even respond to you in terms of nodding our head or saying, good idea. We can register this. It's possible that during the staff report, staff could comment on it, but there's nothing we can do tonight. We can take it to a committee, we can bring it back to the commission if that's appropriate, or there just can be action on it. But so we very much appreciate you're here raising an important issue. Please don't expect that we're going to all raise our hands when you're done or something, okay?
Absolutely no issue there.
Okay.
We just want to bring this to your attention.
Okay, so I think the conclusion is we can't make it work, so
Okay.
I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
If you can hold it up there if you like.
Okay, yeah, so I have a couple of photos that we can illustrate the baseline where the grass is. So do you want me to continue where you left off, or do you want me to start over?
Continue where you left off.
Okay, so the El Camino Park, the way it's currently configured with 10 feet of grass inside, like right along the baseline, this age group, we're unable to host other cities for this in-between league. So we're having to go outside of the city to do our games, which is great. You know, we want to build those partnerships and relationships with other leagues. But we would like to, in the spring, host our own 50/70 and 54/80. So at this time, we can't. So we're very happy to have, as I said, this partnership with our City Parks Department, and are ready to help in whatever way possible to make our young players' dreams to play this greatest American pastime continue for them. And that's it.
Thank you very much. We do have active subcommittees on this. We have your email address here. If the subcommittee would like something in terms of more explanation, we know how to reach out to you.
Right, and how would it be an agendized item in future?
From the fact that you've presented this, our ad hoc will review it, and they'll propose it as an agenda item. But we can move forward with this, with considering what you're talking about. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
While you're still there, we can ask a clarifying question. So I have one of those.
I just wanted to ask real quickly to clarify, the request is to increase the size of the dirt infield in order to accommodate the desired playing field sizes?
So there's a second parent volunteer coach here that has more of the logistics in explaining that.
I'm sorry. Actually, the picture shows it very clearly now. By the way, my name is Craig Inagisawa. I've been a Little League coach for over 10 years. I've also coached Babe Ruth. My two sons went through Little League and I've graduated from it. But I'm retired now and I continue on as a volunteer coach. The current configured, as you can see from the area view, it's supposed to be a circular grass infield. As you can see, it's basically 3 straight lines, and the dirt for around first base and third base is long enough for 54/80, although the city won't allow us to put the base anchors in. What's in contention now is second base. So as you can see, it kind of catty corners behind the pitcher's mound. We need that. My proposal, or our proposal, would be to continue the straight lines on the 2 sides and to cut that corner so the total outfield grass, I guess you would say, would be rectangular instead of 3-sided as it is now. So as you can see, it's approximately about 10 more feet of grass right where the cursor is. We've asked the city, we've asked Mark Ribeiro to do this, and he's refused. And the 3 reasons he gave us was maintenance, irrigation, and playability, which I like to address right now. Maintenance, I believe, would be easier because it would be, the lawnmowers would cut just 2 straight lines instead of trying to do a circular, which is not even possible right now. Irrigation, I have some, if you blow that up, you see that area right where the edge of the dirt is. That area is not getting covered by the one sprinkler that's supposed to be irrigating that area. And I have another picture, and her picture shows it's brown now. My picture's about 2 weeks old from the end of the summer, so it's pretty much brown. So the water's not getting there. And then as far as playability goes, the outer edge of the grass, no one plays there. The outfielders are well past that. The infielders the ball's coming from in front of them, so that edge, it really doesn't matter whether it's circular, linear, or any shape. And for instance, the Palo Alto High School field is, the edge of the outer edge is rectangular. So if it's good enough for high school, I think for recreational baseball, that's not even an issue.
So, thank you. We have one more question. Did we
Sure.
get your name?
I think it's the second one. Craig. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is this
Craig.
your card?
Yes, Craig Inagisawa.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, my son played 50-70 down at the Baylands on the skin field. You can't use that, or?
Right now, we don't use that because of two reasons. It's being retrofitted, and also the backstop is like 10 feet behind
Yeah,
home plate, so it's not even really
it's very
good for
tight.
any kind of Little League baseball at all.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I'll say thank you to both of you.
Okay, thank you.
Another non-agenda item, Shani Kleinhaus.
Good evening. Shani Kleinhaus for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Last week, there was an article, a paper published in Science magazine, that is a respected magazine, that showed that almost 3 billion birds have disappeared in the past 50 years. That is, birds that are not getting replenished, they're gone. There are 3 billion fewer breeding birds in North America today as opposed to 50 years ago. Even common, very beloved species are disappearing. Landscapes are losing their ability to support birds, and there are some things we can do about it. So birds are the most studied creatures because there's so much cities and science and always has been. People are out there, they see them. Some of the questions I get asked by Palo Alto residents is what happened to our songbirds? Where did they go? People notice. They notice that they're gone. They notice they don't hear them anymore in the morning. The birds that come in winter to their yards, there are fewer and fewer of them. They put the seeds out, and the birds that come are smaller flocks. And, I can put it to a lot of different reasons to why they're disappearing. And there are a lot of reasons. The increasing number of crows is one, migration hazards is another, buildings and collision is yet another one. But one of the things that came out really strongly in a symposium that the Native Plant Society had this last weekend is that they're losing their food resources. There was a massive die-off in Alaska just year after year in the past 5 years because the birds are starving. They just don't find enough food either for themselves or for their nestlings and their young. And so we're losing them. And we lost a quarter of all the birds of the North America in 50 years. So what can we do about it in Palo Alto? I mean, we can't save them all the way to Alaska where they go breeding. We're limited in what we can do, but there are things that we can do. And what I was thinking is most of the insects, the lepidopterans that have caterpillars, which are the most important food source for chicks, for the baby nestlings, those have very specific relationship with native plants. They don't just use to eat anything. They use specific native plants, partially because the plants have a lot of protection from being eaten, and those specific species of insects have learned how to overcome those, either metabolically by having certain enzymes or behaviorally. So what we need to do is to provide bugs, essentially. And how do we do that? So I think in every project that you look at, try to see where can we put some native plants, where can we put trees, how are we going to do that? And there is more and more available in nurseries. They don't have, if we're planting a native plant garden in a city park, it doesn't have to be locally collected seeds. You can be a little more flexible. There are ways to do it. And we should be doing it. We should rebuild Palo Alto as a native plant city where the trees that we plant and the trees that we recommend to residents to plant, there's plenty of really beautiful, drought-tolerant, local and California native species. And we really need to start focusing on that because we're losing the most beautiful thing on earth, our birds, and you know, they're rock stars. They dress up, they sing, they're just lovely, and we don't want to lose them. So please, in every project you see how can we increase native plants to 80%, put only native trees. I can provide you with lists of trees if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Not often we have people come before us and say, we want more bugs. I'd like to also mention, this should maybe go at the end, but we did attend with Darren an ice cream social, and we did get people coming and talking to us about various things, and based on that, we received an awful lot of letters about the Eleanor Party Dog Park and the Eleanor Party bathrooms as well. And I have not counted them up one way or the other. I just think it's worth noting that we did get citizen engagement through that event, and we do have citizen engagement input that we should follow up on later. With that, if there are no other speakers, we'll go to the department report.
Good evening, Darren Anderson, Community Services Department. I've got really good news. The Birch Street property, 3350 Birch Street, we're pleased to let you know the sale of that property across from Bulware Park is complete, and the city now has the title. So that is going to be our newest piece of parkland. The next step is to dedicate the property as parkland. We'll begin drafting the ordinance very soon. And Public Works, Peter Jensen, my colleague from Public Works, is planning a community meeting on October 17th for what the community would like to see on that parcel of land. And meeting details will come soon. I'll be sure to alert the commission. Just a reminder again, the black and white ball is scheduled for Friday, October 4th, 7 p.m. to midnight. Tickets are still available, as I understand it. We had some lighting issues at Stanford Palo Alto Park. The work scheduled for October 16th to fix that. The Coverly Track and Field Project, Peter Jensen's managed this one and did a really great job. The field turned out beautifully and is now complete. Unfortunately, there's an issue with the track that's going to be delayed and not ready to open until October 10th. It's a matter of the asphalt that is the base of the track needs more time to cure, so a little longer than we were anticipating. We had scheduled play for October 7th because the project was supposed to be complete by that time, so we'll work with the contractor to figure out ways to get them across that track that's not done, yet onto the field to play. I'd also planned a ribbon cutting for October 4th. That'll be deferred, so we'll have a new date for that in the near future. And again, when we have that, we'll notify you. Pickleball over at Mitchell Park. That project is on track to be completed by November 15th. I had a question at one of the last meetings, and perhaps via email afterward, from Commissioner Moss relating to signs and banners that he had seen and noticed in many of our parks plastered along the fences. And he asked, are people paying for those? Are they supposed to be there? I double-checked with Recreation. The banners are not allowed on park fences. The groups that put them up are asked to remove them. And this year we've had, according to Adam, excessive amounts of leagues and groups just coming and putting them up without asking. Adam said he'd talk to the rec staff and make sure we take them down on a more regular basis. However, City of Palo Alto does have 3 locations where banners may be posted for a fee. That's in front of Coverly, in front of Lucy Stern Community Center, and an overpass on Embarcadero Road. It's $30 for nonprofits and $60 for profit groups for 1 week to hang those banners in those 3 locations. El Camino Park synthetic turf. We've had an issue with the infill at this park. It's a frustrating one. The park is only 3.5 years old that it went in, and the infill has started to break down and mold together, melt. And when we contacted the manufacturer, they came out right away. They did laboratory tests and determined that they had specified the wrong product for our climate. So it wasn't properly UV rated. And so it's failing. and they, at their own expense, are going to remove it all and replace it with the appropriate infill, which has got that correct UV rating. That work will be done October 14th through the 25th. That's a 2-week period. However, we anticipate they'll probably get it done in 1 week, but we need to block that amount of time off for them to get the work done. Also, during that time, there's some field, that closure will have some unrelated field damage repaired, little seams along the synthetic turf that need to be repaired. The JMZ update. Unfortunately, the zoo is 2 months behind schedule. The building is on schedule, but we're going to need a little extra time to get the zoo sorted out. We need 6 months minimum for a commissioning period after the project's complete before we can open. And this is to ship, quarantine, introduce, and train animals and grow the grasses and other plants. So with this delay of the project, we had been looking at the summer of 2020 to open. Now the opening will be the first week of October 2020. They also, this is the Junior Museum, received a grant recently for $250,000 from for the California Dinosaur Garden. This is going to be an exhibit. And the Friends of the JMZ have committed to raise $300,000 to complete the funding for this permanent exhibition, which will open in the spring and summer of 2022. An update on the Bixby Park pathways. Due to subsidence, Bixby Park is former landfill, and it will subside, has always done so, and will continue to do so. And as it subsides, we have to add fill. Soil needs to be replaced on the top so the water grades off appropriately, so you don't have standing water, which contributes to leachate problems. So they recently did a very large area, added the soil back in, and in doing so, they had buried a number of trails. Those have all been rebuilt, withstanding one little section of 200 feet that yet to be done, which will be done at the end of next week. But the rest of the trails were inspected and in really good shape. It begs the question, I know the commissioners have asked me many times, are we looking at what's the next filling process? How often is this going to happen? And does it have to be so much area? Because this last one was 20 acres or so of a 130-acre parcel of Bixby. Public Works informed me there'll be no more filling for this year, but next spring we'll be filling approximately 5 acres that have subsided. On an annual basis, we'll be looking at about 5 acres. I asked them not to exceed that amount, and they think they can do that, which will minimize impact to the rest of the preserve users. Ramos Park CIP, this is both the improvement to Ramos Park and the restroom CIP that we hope to do there. Public Works, Peter Jensen is helping set up a meeting in late November for that. I know we had talked about doing that earlier, where staff has just got a lot of projects running concurrently, and some of them are getting pushed out a little bit. The 101 PED bike bridge update, this project is going out to bid on October 2nd. It goes to council in November for award of contract, and they plan to begin construction fall of this year, 2019. The construction window is approximately 18 months, and they hope to complete by approximately March 2020. I had a question at the last meeting about the Dawn Redwood at the post office, and I had confirmed with the urban forest team that irrigation has been added to help sustain that Dawn Redwood. Sea level rise, an ongoing topic for us. Public Works will be bringing, when I meet with the chair to set our agenda, if this fits, we'll be bringing the horizontal levee project to the commission in October for discussion. And that concludes staff presentation.
Thank you, Darren. I'd like to see if there are any questions. Jeff?
Thank you, Darren. I just had a quick question on the Coverly field, just to clarify. The field is ready, the track is not. Did you say that the field would be able to be used before the track is completed or not?
That's the part we're working out. Thank you for that question, and it's difficult. Peter, again, who's managing it, said he's going to have conversations with the contractor to see if there's some ways strategically to work on the track that we can get in. They'll do it in gradual passes, so they add some, they wait for that to cure, they add some more, and maybe strategically we can work to get the players on.
So potentially the field could be used for games on weekends and for practices in the evenings before the track is done? Yes, starting when we have the scheduled play, which is October 7th. Right. I know that there's a tournament next weekend that one of the soccer organizations was interested in getting on the field for. It sounds like it wouldn't be able to happen. Is that a possibility, or that's probably too soon? I would say remote. Yeah, I would say that's a remote possibility. We can certainly discuss it more, and I'm glad to communicate after the fact if there's
different things we hear from the contractor that might allow it. We're a little apprehensive about people getting onto the field playing and then have the field closed while we're working on the track. It's also an active construction site, and we haven't signed off on the whole project yet.
I appreciate that we need to be conservative in our approach and make sure we don't take any steps backwards. And thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Ann?
Just a comment. I, too, was at the ice cream social, and I just wanted to say that we're pretty lucky to have all the services in Palo Alto. Fire was there, utilities was there, and then Canopy and others. And it just was a really nice atmosphere, so hats off to the Midtown Neighbors Association, and also to you, Darren, for the snake and all the education. It was pretty remarkable, so thank you very, very much. One question about another kind of animal. I noticed that there's a lot of geese at Greer Park on all the fields. Is that pretty usual this time of year?
It is, yeah. Unfortunately, they can cause issues. It used to be the same problem at the golf course perpetually. Golf course and some of the urban parks like Greer that are especially close to the Baylands. And it is common. There's not a lot we can do. Sometimes we try to flush them off a little bit, especially if we know games are starting with the irrigation. If you turn it on, it kind of moves them on a little bit. But it's just part of the Bay Area. We have a lot of Canada geese, resident Canada geese. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Councilmember McCormick, do you have any questions? I'd like to just make a couple of comments. Number one, congratulations on adding the parkland. Thank you for answering the signs and banners question. I'm sure Commissioner Moss will appreciate that. Thank you for your response and efforts relative to the disturbances, continuing disturbances on Bixby. I think that's great. And I think you said 18 months for the bike bridge, and therefore to be done in 2020, March 2020. That would be March 2021, right?
Oh. I'll double check that with Public Works, but my apologies.
I just don't want to show up here next March and say, what
Why
the hell's
isn't this
going on
done?
here? You said
Yes.
March 2020.
21 is correct. Sorry about that.
With that correction to my hearing mistake, let's move on to the next item, which would be approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the minutes? I do have one comment. I can't believe that we let Darren get away with saying the progress on the Cubberley track is on track. If there are no other silly comments, can I have a motion?
I so move.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. With that, I'd like to invite Peter Jensen to speak to us about the amendment of the Park Improvement Ordinance for the Rinconada Park. Welcome, Peter. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Commissioners, Peter Jensen, landscape architect for the City of Palo Alto. Chair, I'd like to ask if it's possible to have oral communications before from the public on the topic.
I would suggest that we let you speak, then we have oral communications.
That's fine.
Unless Karen, is Karen here? Karen, are you eager to speak before he speaks, or are you willing to wait? That's fine with us, unless you think that what he's going to say will inform your comments.
I don't think it's going to change anything.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. My name is Karen Smithstad. I have been a resident in Palo Alto for 36 years. I have been involved with Girl Scouts in Palo Alto for more than 26 years, and I've been the volunteer Scout House manager for more than 20 years. Volunteer as opposed to a paid position. Girl Scouting in Palo Alto is a very traditional organization. The Girl Scout House, Lou Henry Hoover Program Center, was begun in 1924 with donations, monetary donations material donations and labor, and has been a working program center for Girl Scouts since 1926. Several adult members from Girl Scouts in Palo Alto were part of the participating community discussion group that Peter Jensen began more than 2 years ago. And at those presentations, we were excited to see that part of the plan was a potential fire circle for Girl Scouting next to Lou Henry Hoover Program Center. We've always relied on the Boy Scout Fire Center for any of our outdoor singing activities or programs, and always had to make advance reservations in order to use their facility. And sometimes the calendar did not allow for us to be able to use it. Having our own outside area for program would just be a dream come true for everybody in Palo Alto in Girl Scouting. We're committed to this project. It, again, is a dream that we have had for many, many years, and we are willing to help with funding, and we can contribute 1/2 of the cost up to $15,000 from Girl Scouting in Palo Alto, and hope that that allows the fire circle to be included in the plans. And we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Shani, I believe I have a card from you as well. Would you like to speak now? Peter?
Commissioners, I'm just going to go through a very quick presentation, talk about the Girl Scout fire ring area, fire pit area, locate where that's going to be, kind of the idea behind it, and how it was included basically in the plan is something. So we've looked at presentation before about the Rinconada improvement plan. It's getting very close for the construction documents to be complete, and we'd like to go out to actually to bid on that project sometime next month. We were and am hoping to coincide that work with the JMZ, so the park and the JMZ will be completed around closely to the same time. The original plan did not include the Girl Scout fire pit area, but the Rinconada Long Range Plan, which we worked on a few years ago, that we adopted, does show the fire pit element. It's been something that's been in the plan for a long time. Unfortunately, because of restraints with funding, we were not able to add it to the current project, but the Girl Scouts did reach out to me, and they did express that they would like to have the fire pit in there. Of course, we are working down at that end of the park. As you can see, kind of our improvement area there, and really most of the improvements are in that area. So with the playground, the renovation of the existing picnic area, a new picnic area, the new configuration of the main pathway, basically everything in that space is really going to be renovated, especially since now too the parking lot and the front of the Girl Scout house, the Hoover house, is also being renovated. With that, the Girl Scouts did, at first when we spoke, talked about a contribution of $5,000, which I thought was very generous. Tonight I hear that's a little bit more, which definitely helps out because, of course, we're trying to make this dollar stretch as far as possible. I do think that we can add it into the plan package and have a good chance of building it and giving a space for the Girl Scouts, just like the Boy Scouts, to have their own fire pit area. That fire pit area then would be basically over here where this 13 is, and we can look at a picture basically right here, and you're looking along Hopkins here, and here's the side of the Hoover house, and then basically in this area right here, which is pretty much a area for planting, and you can see the one tree which would stay, but it's not really overly used. It is within the park parcel for Rinconada. So the idea would basically be to use that kind of unused area and develop it into the fire pit area. What that would mean is an aspect of the current plan would be to basically rebuild the screen fence that is there. This would now increase that screen fence basically down and then toward the Girl Scout house at this corner, and then basically back to this corner here. So you would have a defined, basically secured area in that space. The existing tree, like I said, would remain. That's sitting here. The Girl Scout then area, the fire pit, as you can see it here, with surrounding benches, decomposed granite paving, and then some enhanced planting around the back. This then provides that space. It's not overly complex or as extravagant as the Boy Scout area is, but it does provide, I think, that gathering space that they're looking for with that fire element. I would say that currently we really aren't allowed to burn wood any longer because of the air, so this would be a gas-operated fire pit, which works out very nicely because actually the gas meter sits very close to here, so not very difficult to get that utility to the fire pit itself. The cost for the entire thing that we've started to look at was in the $25,000 range, and that looked at demoing the area there and clearing it out, building the fence, installing the fire pit, and the gas line. Of course, the gas itself and the shutoff are some more of the expensive parts of the design or the project itself. So with that, we would like to include the fire pit area in the park improvement ordinance and include it in the bid package and build a fire pit for the Girl Scouts. So.
Shani, again, is this card something that you want to speak to?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that this park is frequented by birders. There's bluebirds nesting there and other birds that are really beautiful. And so my hope is that we'll provide food for them by planting a lot of native plants. So it was nice to see that it includes a pollinator garden and native plantings. And I would encourage the city to do similar to some of the Google urban habitats, which is 80% native plants. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commission members? Keith?
I have a question about the fire pit. Would this be exclusively used by the Girl Scouts, or could other groups sign up for that?
That is not something that we have finalized yet. It is a city building and facility. I think if the community expressed enough interest in using it, that we would set up a program for them to have access to it. But it's mostly used for and by the Girl Scouts.
Yeah, I would imagine it'd be mostly Girl Scouts, but so we might have something like we do for soccer fields, for example. They would call up Adam and say, "Hey, I want a fire pit. They need to see if it's open." Okay.
And again, because we have this another facility that's a little bit larger with the Boy Scout facility, where that's already is rented out, then I don't see a lot of more use from the outside besides the Girl Scout really using that space.
Are there other questions? Jeff?
Yes, Peter, could you clarify what the fence material is around the fire pit area?
The fence material would be almost identical to the fencing material that's out there now. So we're just going to basically match the aesthetic of the existing fence, which is I don't know if that had an image of, oh, you can start to see it over here actually. So currently now there's a screen or wooden fence. It's an alternating wood slat that screens the picnic area. Basically that fence line would be extended down and then returned to the building here, and in this location would be a set of double gates to access basically the inside of it.
So it's a wood fence that blocks view inside.
Right.
Can you clarify where the bathroom would be? We're thinking about possibly putting a bathroom in now or in the future nearby?
It would be close by. Let's go back to this one. The restroom then, I wish I had a closer one for you. the restroom sits basically, here's the picnic area that would be between, the fire pit would be over here, the picnic area, and then the bathroom sits where the two pathways kind of come together. So it is fairly close proximity into that thing. The fence also plays a role in the restroom itself, because we're looking at basically running it along the back of the restroom, so the facade or the rear of it remains kind of aesthetically what it is now, the fence, even though you're going to see a roof line that's up there, but that's basically, it's in that space.
Can you go back to the slide that had the fire pit? Okay, so on this one,
So it would be over here more, sitting basically
oh, okay.
in this section. And the back of it would be along that fence line, which is here.
And there is a bathroom in the Girl Scout house as well.
There is a restroom facility in the Girl Scout, yes. I mean, it's used for the Girl Scouts, but yes.
And do you have a question?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Very enthusiastic about having the fire pit, and thank you very much for incorporating it as a Girl Scout and a Girl Scout leader and a Brownie leader. We would have loved to have a fire pit, and thanks to the Girl Scouts for offering to absorb some of the expenses as well, so thank you.
Councilmember Cormack, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you. It's always wonderful to see public-private participation happening in advance. One thing I don't know if staff has reflected on yet is thinking about the use of natural gas in general as we think about our REACH codes. Other communities are making decisions about fire pits and backyard barbecues, so it's just something for staff to contemplate how this fits with some of our other goals. And then I just want to be sure I understand from a budgetary perspective the line in the discussion. So it'd be a bid alternate item. If the bid came in at, say, $15,000 over the engineer's estimate, it would go forward. And if it came in above that, it would not? Is that a correct interpretation of what you have here, or is it more complicated?
This afternoon, when the contribution was in the $5,000 range, that was, I think, the feeling towards it. I'd have to, and I think staff would have to have some conversations more about it now, but with the added donation by the Girl Scouts, I think that it would just be a bid item, not a bid alternate item in the plan.
Okay. Sounds like an auction. And then when this comes to council, would you envision it being on consent or as an action item?
The park improvement ordinance will come to the council sometime very soon, within the month or so, and that will be on, usually it's on the consent calendar, but
Okay.
it's up to them, the council, if they want to have further discussion about it. Yes.
That's always wonderful. Thank you so much.
So I was surprised by what you just said. Because there's a larger contribution, you wouldn't ask for it as an option, so we can understand that it's all of a sudden costing $35,000 or and not $15,000 or something?
I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with the cost estimate we put together. I mean, we wouldn't usually, when we put estimates together, they're on the high side. So I would say that the contribution and the remaining amount, that we definitely have the remaining amount for that item to be put into the bid. So.
Okay, no, I understand. I am surprised. I guess it can't be wood, it has to be gas. Is the Boy Scouts fire pit in any way grandfathered in and it can still be wood, or what's?
I cannot answer that question. I think that it's definitely been there for a long time, and no one really questions of how it's used, so I can't really answer that or not.
But I think it would be hypocritical of us to be sitting here being the Parks and Rec Commission and saying, and by the way, why don't we burn more wood, and I'm even a little uneasy about the Girl Scouts trying to look after nature and learn about nature and whatever. Why don't we just burn burn gas, and you know, I know it's not an awful lot, and it's probably not going to change the world, but it is. I can't not ask. Was that considered? Was it considered by the Girl Scouts that they'd be better off planting native plants to celebrate, or put a native plant in the middle to as their
I haven't
gathering
had
point?
that discussion with them, so I couldn't say. I just know that the fire pit from the long-range plan was something that was supported by the general community as an element that's back there. Yeah, I can't say yes.
General community supported a lot of things previously that
Yes.
that maybe they'd think twice about today. I'm going to start on the left with Jeff and see if anybody would like to comment before we vote. This is an action item, so we do need a motion. And so as you speak, think about what the motion might be and what your position on it would be.
Yeah, just a quick question. What's the lifespan and maintenance, and what are the potential pitfalls, or will there be other costs that arise from this?
The fire pit itself should survive. Actually, I should have added that into the presentation, the image of it. It's a prefabricated, not overly expensive, but definitely should be able to survive outside for 15 to 20 years, I would say. The gas has some nuance to it because you have to turn it on and off, of course. It will be, the valve for it will be in a locked box, so there is that aspect to it just to maintain its safety. The area right now is just being maintained as a planting area, so majority of it will stay some planting. We'll have to discuss more with the Girl Scouts how they would like it to be maintained, but I would imagine that our parks maintenance staff would be responsible to go in every once in a while and remove debris from the DG leaves and things of that nature. So it will have some cost, of course. It's an added element. We'll definitely need maintenance over time, but those things are, compared to the facilities that we have around the city, it's very minimal for this. We did definitely try to design it to be simple and easy to maintain and to, add a new one when the time comes for that, so.
And what are the costs associated with running a gas fire pit, or how much gas is used, or just, I'm not as familiar with.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you like the cost of it or the amount of gas used. I know that it uses a very little amount for it. Even a larger gas fire pit for residential use, I think that I've seen like $5 a month or something like that. It's really kind of a small amount there. In this respect too, I don't know exactly. I can't see it running for hours and hours and hours at a time, so I think that controls it as well.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Peter, thank you. You've put a lot of work into the Rinconada plan, so well done. And to the Girl Scouts, thank you as well. I think this is a great idea and a great addition. I totally appreciate what Chairman McDougall is noting about additional potential pollution from a gas fixture, but I think that in this instance, it really would be probably used so intermittently, so little, that it's not going to be a significant addition on that front. So thank you again. I think this looks great, and congratulations. I presume that you're going to be memorializing with the Girl Scouts some plan around usage, maintenance.
Yes, we'll definitely get into that and build some type of a use agreement or understanding of how it needs to be used and how it's going to be maintained. So that would definitely be a step that we will start to discuss basically after this.
What would be the capacity? How many girls could we get around here? Is there like 20 in there?
No, I think we measured it out to get somewhere between 40 and 50, depending upon the size of course, the human being sitting there. So Girl Scouts are a little bit smaller, so they can get a few more in there. So I think that's basically the size that I discussed with the Girl Scouts of the kind of size of the groups that would be wanting to use the space.
That's good. I want to make sure that they're in the loop and we size it correctly, because if it's too small and then kids are standing around, that just detracts from the experience.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, but I concur with the other commissioners. I think this would be a great addition. It will add some fossil fuel, but I don't think we're burning it 24 hours a day. It's just going to be here and there, so we'll swallow hard and say yes.
Ann? Do you have any further comments, questions? No. Jeff?
Thank you, Peter, for all the work on this. My wife's been a Girl Scout leader, and my 2 daughters were Girl Scouts, and one had regular meetings at the Hoover Girl Scout House. So I'm fairly familiar with it. I think I've been to the fire pit the Boy Scout fire pit once, and I think that was an event for a nonprofit and not the Girl Scouts. And I know that maybe once or twice my daughters made it over there, but not often. So I do appreciate the need for it. It's great that it's not going to be wood burning, and I concur with the others that in a perfect world we wouldn't be burning gas either, but we can swallow it a bit on this one. And so I will be supporting this. Thank you for your effort.
Do I have a motion? Do we need to discuss, Peter, would you like to tell us what the motion might need to be?
I think that the motion would be to add the language about the fire pit to the Parks Improvement Ordinance.
It doesn't need to be anything fancier than that.
No, I don't think so.
Can I have a motion?
I'll move that we add the fire pit to the Park Improvement Ordinance.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I think, in fact, I would like to go on record as abstaining. So with that, it passes. One more question I would like to ask. I think we need to explore, in terms of equity and in terms of our concern for the environment, what are the regulations and what is the situation with the Boy Scouts fire pit? If I'm sitting here worried about burning a little gas, and I agree with everybody, it's a little gas, not a big deal. It's more the hypocrisy than the gas. And we're allowing the Boy Scouts, totally different set of rules. It doesn't seem like equality and doesn't seem appropriate at all. So I'd like to hear back what the Boy Scout fire pit situation is. Please.
We'll have further conversations with staff about that and bring back the answer to that at next meeting.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, Peter. We can move on to the Parks and Open Space regulation update. Once again, this is an action item. We will be asking for a motion and a vote.
Good evening, Darren Anderson again, Community Services, here tonight with an action item for seeking the recommendation from the Commission that Council adopt the proposed amendments to the Park and Open Space regulations. The Commission discussed the draft amendments to these regulations at the August 27th meeting, and during that meeting, there were a few comments and suggestions, both from the Commission and the general public, regarding changes that resulted in changes to these updates. One of the changes was adding the table of contents, which you can see here in the slide. This was actually a suggestion from one of the members of the community who went home that night, typed it up and sent it to me. It was really, really thoughtful. Mr. Conrad, so I would like to acknowledge Jeff Conrad for that. It was very thoughtful. And this was in response to Chair McDougall's suggestion that we organize this in such a way that it's easy to search it and find what you want, what you'd like. I should also note this is consistent with how the city's municipal code is organized, where you can press on one of the things from the table of contents that takes you right to your bookmarked area. Another commission suggestion was to amend R116I. This regulation prohibits animals from being on the deck of the pool, and the suggestion was to allow service animals at the pool. And we checked both with pool staff and city attorney's office, who said, in fact, yes, you have to allow service animals there. And so this regulation's been edited to allow those service animals as defined by the state and federal law. And that same community member that I mentioned before had also suggested changing R121A. This is the regulation that restricts commercial photography and filming. And essentially what he wanted to add was a definition and description of what commercial meant, so it was clear to users coming to film or photograph in the park. And so that was added. I ran all these past the ad hoc committee, and they supported all these changes. And again, I'd like to conclude this just with thanking the ad hoc committee and Mr. Conrad for their generous support.
We do have one card that was just handed on this subject. Herb Borak, if you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Chairman Kaduga, and good evening. I just had one question about the dog exercise areas. I recall when the Pierce Park, around the time of the Pierce Park dog exercise area being considered, that there was discussion about the design of the fencing around the parks, including the height of the fencing, and I thought that had been included in the regulations, and perhaps staff can refresh my memory about that. I think one of the concerns was that the fence between the exercise area and the public part of the park would be 5 foot high, and there was discussion of that. Now, since I don't have it in writing in front of me, I'm just doing this from memory. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think it's usually appropriate to respond to a citizen question, but I'm going to ask the citizen's question coming from me, and maybe we can clarify that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's correct. We had discussions about fencing. We've got one dog park. This is Hoover Park, where the fence was, for some reason, before my time, put in at 3 feet. And it's proven to be a problem for the users. They've requested change. We are actually implementing that change now. We're posting signage for raising that fence soon. It wasn't added to the regulations, but rather to sort of our internal practices. As we add dog parks or renovate ones, we ensure that the fencing is at that 5 foot height. There may be areas, for example, if we added one that was right next to a chain track, where you might want that above 5 feet. In fact, that's what we have with the existing boundary of Pierce Park. So rather than putting in the code to say 5 or at least 5, I think it just ends up in the staff practice to continue with that 5 foot as a best management practice.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to codify every best practice, so I think that personally I would suggest that we not do that, but recognize the question that Mr. Borak brought up. Are there any other specific questions to Derek?
I'm looking on page 5, that'd be R110A. And it isn't clear to me, are tables and stages allowed without a permit? If I want to go down and put a table up on Linton Plaza, can I go do that, or do I have to get a permit for that? It talks about, the A talks about for permitted events, and it has a bunch of limitations on tables, but it doesn't say if I don't have a permit, what applies to me? What constraints do I have?
For portable tables and barbecues and chairs, you do need a permit. So for parks, and the rationale behind this was absent this law, it used to be that places like Rinconada, which were very popular for barbecuing, had multiple portable tables. They'd bring in their portable barbecues, and they'd exhaust and overwhelm the existing resources like trash, recycling, compost, as well as the restrooms, and the park would be overrun. And so that law was put into place to kind of curb people from exceeding the capacity. If we haven't provided a picnic table, they don't want you to bring your own unless you have a permit.
Okay, so in any park, I can't bring a table or a chair or a stage?
You could bring a chair, I'm sorry, the stage and the table. would be the ones that would require a permit.
And do we say that in here?
Yeah, it's a different code, not in the Lytton Plaza one. I'd have to do some searching to dig up exactly
But it's
where
somewhere in
at.
here that says that you
Yeah.
can't bring tables or stages?
It's that or in the municipal code. Sorry, I don't have it
Okay.
right in front of me. If you give me a few minutes, I could find it.
I mean,
Do you want him to continue to look for it now, or?
we can take this offline, but, I mean, I would think a
Remember, we're voting tonight, so.
yeah, I think a reasonable edit would be on A, say, tables require a permit. And then you can go on and say, for permitted uses, these are the restrictions. And same with G, say, uses of stages require permits.
But if that's already covered somewhere, we don't necessarily want to be redundant, especially if it's in this document somewhere.
If it's in this document, then I'm fine. If it's in another document, then just for clarity. Because that's one of the problems, is that people want to use the parks and they look at something and then, I mean, that was what part of the cleanup was, to make it logical. And when I was looking through here, it wasn't obvious to me what was allowed without a permit and what required a permit.
And Commissioner Rechtel, can you reiterate what you would like to happen? You would like you be able to bring a table without a permit? Is that what you were saying?
No.
Oh.
No, I'm not trying to change the rules, I'm just
Just
trying
to
to clarify.
Oh, I see.
Just to make it clear in A that the use of a table requires a permit, and on number G, letter G,
What number? What R?
R1-10A.
Okay, thank you. And R110G is stages require permit.
Yeah, unless there's another spot in here.
I don't believe stages are called out in any other spot for permits in another spot. It's just the tables and portable barbecues.
Go ahead.
Darren, could I ask you, and I have just searched through this document for table, and I don't see anything that would cover it, but is this something that you would perceive as a problem that we need to address to be more clear, or
It hasn't been an issue, yeah, not that I'm aware of.
and if we were to change the wording of this and approve it via action, would it have to go through the legal department before it goes to council? Are there any repercussions of
Just
that?
to make sure maybe we didn't set up something to be in conflict, it probably would require some additional review. And if that's the will of the commission, I'm glad to bring it back at the next commission meeting.
I'm not sure if it's that important,
Okay.
but if it would be trivial to add it, it does add some clarity, but I don't want to make work for you.
So you're suggesting if we were to add it, we wouldn't be able to vote on it tonight as an action? Or you would not recommend voting for it as an
Can you
action?
tell me exactly what we changed, and I can get a feel if I think there's going to be a conflict with something else and need some more time to
I
review
will
it?
defer to my
Yeah.
esteemed colleague.
Okay. On this is page 5, R1-10A. That one is talking about tables in those 3 parks, but my confusion in reading that, it wasn't obvious what restrictions there were, if any, on tables if I didn't have a permit. And so what I would propose is start that bullet out with, the use of a table requires a permit. And likewise, G, I would start saying, the use of a stage requires a permit, period. And just add those 2 sentences beginning of those bullets.
So I would also suggest that this section only applies to these
Yeah.
clauses. It doesn't apply to parks overall, so I don't think that's accomplishing what you're looking for.
Yeah, ideally, you would have that in a different section that applied to all parks, so.
I'm going to suggest that we step back from this particular point and
Okay.
see if there are other points that would cause us to go further with this.
Okay.
Ryan, your light's on. Would you care to speak, or?
Yeah, Darren, and forgive me, I don't mean to distract you, but I was wondering if you could just take a moment. We received some correspondence on the community garden edit, which I think everyone is now familiar, but the most significant edit to the rules and regs is to remove a fairly lengthy recitation of community garden rules in favor of placing that within the contract that each gardener signs when they lease a plot from the city. And that would mean that that contract and the language around it would really become kind of an administrative decision as to what those terms should look like, of course, in consultation with the commission. But from my perspective, that's the most significant edit to this document. And I just wanted, Darren, maybe you'd provide a little bit of context on why we're doing that and what the thinking is.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is, just for point of reference, R140, Community Gardens, and you could see the 2.5 pages of line strikeouts where it was a lot of administrative, this is how the garden is operated, type of arrangements that only apply to licensed gardeners. And so we thought it was more appropriate that that live in a separate document, which we're creating and which will come to the commission next month, called the Community Garden Guidelines. One of the edits you can see down at the bottom of what remains in the regulation under community gardens is the director may promulgate guidelines for the registration and use of the community gardens. Those are the guidelines that you'll review. And that'll have parameters around the administration of the garden itself. So the ones that remain apply really broadly, not just to licensed gardeners, but the general public, and that's what we've kept in R140, A, B, C, or A through E.
The other thing that I'll say is thank you, Darren. I know you spent a lot of time trying to bring this document to where it's at today, and I think it's an excellent job. So well done.
Jeff, do you have any comments? Ann?
Only on the tennis. R111, on the times, I can't tell from the way it's struck out, the strikeout, whether you're going to use capital AM and PM or little AM and PM. So just to take a look at the, yeah.
I think we changed it to capital.
I think you probably did, and I just isn't clear on here, so that's all.
I think there's a prize for that, catch. Councilmember Cormack, do you have any questions?
Out of curiosity, R16B, it looks like we asked for the home address of some guests in B, but not in C. And just wonder why we do that and if we retain that information. I can imagine a scenario under which perhaps the ranger is double checking perhaps an ID. Just wondering about why we need a home address. I certainly understand why we might need to know if someone is a Palo Alto resident, but if someone isn't, I'm just wondering what the rationale might have been. This might be before your time.
Yeah, forgive me, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
And I don't believe we retain those documents, but I'm not sure what the difference.
Okay, just curiosity.
Yeah.
If there are no other comments or questions, I'll go back to Keith. And Keith, are you satisfied that we can go ahead with this? Or do you think that we have a tables and stages issue?
We're looking at the municipal code right now.
Yeah,
I don't think this is a must-have. This is a nice-to-have. If it's going to be more work for Darren, then I would hold my suggestion. But if it's something that he can add and we can still vote on it without conflict, then I would they think it's an improvement.
I think my response to that one is, again, that particular one pertains only to those 3 plazas. And if we want it broader, it belongs in a different spot. And for the table, I can tell you it already exists. The stage, I don't believe so. I don't believe that is in there. I'd have to find it and search more thoroughly through the municipal code.
So what would be your preference, Darren?
Either way is fine. I'm glad to come back next month with this and make some additional changes, or we can catch them in the next revision. It hasn't been a challenge for staff. I can tell you that piece.
Yeah, I don't want to put it to next month, so I'm pulling my suggestion.
I guess I'd like to explore, why is it necessary to come back next month? Why can't we have a motion that says, we would like to, whatever the motion says, with these 2 changes, to the extent that they don't require you to come back or something. It doesn't seem to me that adding the 2 things that he's suggesting would negate the fact that we've made a motion. All we want to do is add a couple of bullets. I wouldn't think that would require you coming back.
Yeah, and I think it's fine to edit that one if you wanted to just apply to those 3. Is that what you're saying, or you want to?
Well, I'm just asking. I'm saying it just applies to those 3, and is that sufficient, or do we need to just simply make a note saying in 2024 when we're when we're redoing this again, maybe that ought to be looked at. And in the meantime, I hope nobody wants to put a stage somewhere that.
I can see people wanting to play their guitar and set up their own stage down Linton Plaza, so I think it's quite plausible that someone would do that. And if we don't want it there, we can add that sentence.
I tend to think it's a risk. It's a very small risk, but it's a risk, and I would think that we could pass a motion that would be worded such that this is our recommendation to change, unless it causes, we might get advice from a council member on how we might want to write something like that.
I would suggest, if we're just concerned about the 3 plazas in this item, it seems to be implicit that a permit is required for these, suggesting that if someone has a permit, then these are the guidelines, and if you don't have a permit.
The table is more clear because it says with a permit, but the stage one talk about stages, and if you're a guitar player who wants to stand on the stage and play for money, then right now it doesn't seem to prevent that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a motion that forwards this and approves this as is without any modification.
Okay.
Darren, would you like to tell us, do you have suggestions of exactly how the motion should be worded? Is it just simply accept the park and open space regulations?
As titled in the staff report, I think, the recommendation of staff.
As recommended?
Yeah.
Do these have to go to council now or anything like that? Do we need
They do go to council.
So we could add in that and are forwarded to council as submitted?
You would
That we
recommend as
accept them
proposed, yeah.
and suggest that, and approve that staff forward these to council as they were submitted to us.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to that effect? Without worrying about wording it, because I think it's understood.
I move that we approve the amendment of the park and open space regulations as submitted to us by the staff report, or in the staff report.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Anybody abstain? Darren, thank you, and I was remiss in the earlier comments and not saying thank you relative to the indexing. I thought that was really well done, and in fact, I would like to suggest that a thank you letter go from the commission to Citizen Conrad, thanking him for his support and participation and assistance. If you and I could collaborate on that, but I think something that came from staff and commission, recognizing the effort and consideration would be really important.
Will do, thanks.
Thank you. The next item is the Foothills Park Access Pilot. I will once again question whether people would like to comment. I'm actually giving this choice, whether you'd like to comment before the presentation. This will not be a staff presentation. It will actually be a commission presentation, or whether you'd like to hear the presentation first. Since Mr. Borak is standing right there, waving his hands, and would like to comment first, welcome.
Thank you, Chair McDougall. Park and uses and regulations are part of the Palo Alto Municipal Code. In addition, staff has promulgated regulations that implement what is in the municipal code. The changes suggested in this agenda item are not allowed by the municipal code. If you're going to make any, suggest any changes, you need to use your role as an advisory body to the City Council to recommend change to the municipal code. And the agenda item should indicate that, just as you had a park improvement ordinance indicated on the agenda earlier for a fire pit that was proposed at the Girl Scout house. I believe that to the extent that there are people in the community who want Foothills Park to be more like the open space areas managed and owned by the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, perhaps the solution is to find a way where the Open Space District can acquire Foothills Park. Since their purpose is limited to open space, they don't have the competing uses that the city does for spending its budget on personnel for other reasons. And they could provide the adequate staffing that we used to have at Foothills Park to manage the uses at that time, which were residents and their invited guests. My recollection is that the number of staffing at Foothills Park and having staff at the gate at all times changed at the time June Fleming became city manager. June Fleming at the time was, of her appointment, was a resident of Los Altos Hills. And according to the code, she eventually purchased a house and lived in Palo Alto. But she was along the second group of houses, a subdivision along Page Mill Road. The one that's closest to the park, you can actually walk along and enter one of the gates to the service roads in Foothills Park. But to get to there from the subdivision that was directly below it, where Mrs. Fleming lived, you would have to go out onto Page Mill Road, then back onto the beginning of the main street of that upper subdivision and walk all the way, which would be inconvenient. People where Mrs. Fleming lived could only get to Foothills Park in a practical way by driving a car and getting to the gate where they would be stopped, whereas they wouldn't be stopped if they walked in along the other road and entered the no service people to see who's going in through that gate. So I think what you have to consider, regardless of how little or how much you think there should be a pilot study, calling something a pilot study does not change the fact that it violates the municipal code. And so it's the municipal code that would have to be changed if you want to be making any changes to the regulations that are described in the municipal code. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. So I will take the comments and I'll take them in the order that I have them piled here, which may not be the order that they were handed to me. So Tracy Sherman, right?
Good evening.
And I will comment, I'm going to set a timer, but not a buzzer.
Okay.
We generally try and keep presentations to 3 minutes, and I see that there's 4 of you, so.
Well, actually, only one of it, I'm going to speak on behalf of,
And they're going to
of the
cheer?
group. Yes.
Okay.
So if I'm like 30 seconds over.
Great. That's fine.
Okay. My name is Tracy Sherman. I'm a Portola Valley resident, and I'm here with neighbors and community members. We know tonight's meeting is about a pilot project to open Foothills Park to a limited number of non-Palo Alto residents, but still conditionally more visitors to the park. I, along with a number of my neighbors, including myself and Linda Dre Nightingale, co-chairs for Emergency Preparedness for Los Trancos Woods, Tom Blyer, Emergency Preparedness Chair for Vista Verde, Bill Tagg, former CERP Operations Chair, nationwide known as CERT, and former Emergency Preparedness Chair for Vista Verde, and Steve Friedman, Los Trancos Woods Incident Commander and former CERP District Leader. We represent one of the communities bordering the west side of Foothills Park on the border between Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. The Los Trancos Woods Vista Verde community has approximately 300 homes. Just below us is Blue Oaks Development, and below that, the backside of Portola Valley Ranch, another 200 plus homes. There are also many neighborhoods that border Foothills Park on other sides. We think it fair to say that most people in all these neighborhoods are extremely concerned about fire safety, especially due to changing weather patterns. To our mind, the question of opening the park to more people begs broader questions. That would be of import even if the park was not going to change current policy. Along the western side of Foothills Park, there are large swaths of chaparral in which there are no fire breaks, just continuous, contiguous vegetation. Woodside Fire Protection District has recently been doing innovative work at Teague Hill with grant funding to start clearing the park of an overload of fuel. This on the heels of 2 fires, one a lightning strike and the other a man-made fire. We know there is an enormous amount of fuel in Foothills Park, including along the trail system within the park. There is a great deal of innovation taking place these days with regards to forest management. Prescribed burns, working in concert with CAL FIRE, large landscape fuel reduction projects. Woodside Fire Protection District is doing this kind of a project currently at Teague Hill, as is the Redwood City Fire Department in their community. And mastication, including remote masticators for difficult terrain. The Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District Governing Board recently added an objective to its strategic plan: work with fire agencies and surrounding, this is a quote, work with fire agencies and surrounding communities to strengthen the prevention of, preparation for, and response to wildland fire. Our question to you is, are these projects that Foothills Park is considering or would consider? Another question, on extreme weather days, would Foothills Park consider closing the park like they do in the East Bay, and more recently in Woodside Portola Valley with the closing of Windy Hill Preserve, Huddard Park, and Wonderlick Park on days with potential to move into red flag conditions? I'm almost done. May I continue?
Yes, please, I'm sorry.
Los Trancos Road, which borders Foothills Park, is the main evacuation route out for our communities and the main route in for first responders. If Los Trancos Road is cut off due to fire, we have a single lane alternative down Alpine Road, which is absolutely not a desirable evacuation situation. All it would take is one car to stall and everyone else would be blocked from getting out. Think Oakland Hills fire. Therefore, Foothills Park's fire management plan, how and when it will be implemented, as well as potential plans for fuel load reduction in the park is of critical importance to many. Thank you for your consideration. By the way, I have copies of this presentation, my notes here. I also have copies of 2 recent articles from the Almanac. The first one about a fire district awarded grant for wildfire prevention work. This is the Teague Hill project, as well as Woodside Portola Valley in the same fire risk as Paradise. And I made copies for everybody.
If you have copies, if you give them to Natalie, I think, I think I'd certainly appreciate it if they were distributed. And I'd like to thank you and your your associates for coming and for a well-thought-out and articulate presentation. Thank you very much. We like it when our neighbors are willing to show up and discuss what's going on in Palo Alto. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Do you have any questions? I don't know if anybody has any questions for any of us.
Well, in fact, stay where you are, and I'll
Okay.
ask if anybody here has any questions while you're standing there. Keith, your light's on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we can follow up with you as well. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. So the next card I have would be Shani. Johnny, I'll make sure that you can have a copy here. You got one there, good.
Good evening again, Shani Kleinhaus, and I speak as a resident now, not for any organization. Foothills should be looked at as a museum for our community. It should not be looked at as something that is common good. It's a museum because that is where we still have wildlife. And we're always told, oh, they'll go somewhere else when we increase the number of people, when we increase the number of activities. They don't have a lot of places to go anymore. So I think we need to be very careful. And I thought a lot about how can you bring more people that will actually respect it the same way as residents respect their own home. And I had an idea, and I don't know if I can share it with you. It's not in your materials, but there was a question about our gardens. Do non-residents, can they go and garden in our community gardens? Do they need to go through some kind of training? Well, for that park, we need training for people. Same as the Stanford has for Jasper Ridge. If somebody wants to go to Jasper Ridge and bring other people with them, they go through a training program. And that training program allows them to be a docent, a certified docent, and then they can come in. I think we need something like that. It's expensive to bring people in. There's a lot of different impacts that people have on the environment and on the resources that we need, and we don't have enough rangers as is. We need more rangers anyway, whether we open any additional land to people. But I think forming a docent program will connect people. Palo Alto residents can choose to take it or not. Other people should take a training. They don't just go there to use that resource in a way that is not compatible with the beauty and its tranquility and the wildlife that lives there. And I was thinking about the comments that people brought about fire. I think that the fire pits should go away, and I think that they're right that the park should close on high-risk days because they are at risk, and having more and more people, especially on high-risk days, we know that it is an existing risk. And I attended a presentation by Mid-Penn yesterday about how they're going to manage the land, and it's thousands of acres that they'll have to remove a lot of the plant material from. The more we bring people in, the more plant material we have to move out, the more we have to impact the environment. It's not only the bathrooms that are going to get more use, it's everything. And the increased use, we know with birds, a lot of birds will not nest within 300 feet from a trail, not because the trail is there, but because it's being used. They see the people, they don't come there. So the more we do, and we have a system that is working, it's beautiful, I go there a lot. And during the week, there's people there that are not residents, and it's okay with me, but we need to be watchful at how we do something. And I agree with Herb that you can't do a pilot project without having to go through the whole entire code system, and it doesn't need to be done. So please look at the education and stewardship together, and not just open by ticket or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Leland Levy.
Thank you. As a long-term resident of Palo Alto, I want to tell you how impressed I am with the work of the commission, of the committee, and the Park and Recreation Department in putting this pilot program together. It is a test program, and I think it's a very positive thing that it is not permanent. It goes for a year. It is data-based. It does not change the allowed usage capacity of Foothill Park. It keeps in place regulations that have been there a long time, but it allows residents from throughout the community to make use of a park that we have kept to ourselves for a long period of time when, as far as I know, no other community on the peninsula has done the same thing with their open space areas. We have long had a 1,000 person daily maximum usage of Foothill Park, and that will stay in place. I think you, as a commission, should take it upon yourselves to carefully monitor what's being done, because we want to be careful of the ecology of the area. We want to maintain the environment. We want to be careful of the fire dangers. And so you should keep track of the usage. You should not look upon this as a permanent test, but as a program that may lead to something very worthwhile. And with that, I hope that you will approve this test and then monitor it with the care that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladoris Cordell.
Good evening, members of the commission, and thank you for your time. First, I do echo the remarks made by Leland Levy. I'm a longtime resident of Palo Alto, and when I served on the city council from 2004 to 2008, I raised the issue of lifting restrictions on entry to the park. Nothing came of it then, but more than a decade later, the issue has not and will not go away. It is time to open the park, and the pilot proposal is a thoughtful first step in doing so. It is my understanding, first, I believe there is no justification for restricting entry to Foothills Park. And it is my understanding that the origin of the restriction was a response to Los Altos when the city refused to share in the purchase of land. And Palo Altans got miffed and closed the park to Los Altans. That restriction morphed into an all-out ban on outsiders. It was not for any environmental reasons. I urge you to adopt the pilot program, which has been thoughtfully written. I also note that, this is as an aside, that Palo Alto business owners who pay city taxes but who do not live in the city are barred from the park. I believe this is unfair, and I actually question the legality of barring those who actually pay taxes in the city who own businesses here. So I close by saying, first, you have a look at, and I've produced some documentation as well, a look at previous years of attendance at the park that confirmed that there is no justification for the kind of restriction we have. So I ask you, enough of the elitism and the exclusionism. Let's bring the park into the 21st century. Let's open the entry gates to those who desire to visit it under the guidance of this pilot project. And I ask these commission members to please now know it's time, tear down the entry barrier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to do two things. One, I'd like to thank all of the speakers tonight for a very reasoned set of presentations, very thoughtful input, well articulated, and when we have former mayors and former council members visit us, I think we need to make sure we're listening, and when we have our neighbors from Portola Valley coming and talking about safety and so on, we need to listen. So thank you. I'd like to add to the speakers, as I said, maybe a bit unusual, Jeff Paulson, who is a grandson of the Lees and was a park ranger at one point in Foothills Park, has written, all of the commissioners would have received this from Natalie, and to regret that he's not here, but to vote and add his voice for opening the park. And I'd just like to mention that because of the importance of the history, as both Ladora and Lee have mentioned. So with that, I'm going to ask, again, doing something a little different, so we don't have a staff presentation. We do have an ad hoc committee presentation. Ryan, would you like to introduce the topic?
Yeah, thank you, Don, and thank you as well to all of the speakers. Your thoughts and comments are much appreciated. So the last time we spoke about this in July, I think I opened by saying Foothills Park is a special place. I'll say it again, I'll probably say it a dozen times, that Foothills Park is a special place. And I think that the commission, the committee members definitely, and the public more importantly, all recognize that. And it's a place that we want to, I think, share as reasonably as possible because it's a special place. But also we want to ensure that the character of that special place isn't negatively impacted. And that's what this pilot proposal attempts to do. So as everyone knows, the committee and staff, led by Darren, but there's many others that I'll mention in a moment, have tailored this recommendation to study the prospect of allowing for broader public access with controls and very kind of deliberate ways of studying this in order to ensure that the park retains its special character. We've tried to take in the public comments that we heard in July, as well as the comments from commission members, and that's what's reflected in the pilot proposal before you tonight. And by the way, just because there were a couple of comments along these lines, this is just a discussion item this evening. The plan would be, pending the upcoming discussion amongst the commission, to return at a future meeting with an actual action item that proposes some amendments to the municipal code that would allow for this sort of pilot program that would then go to the city council for discussion and eventual action. So before I hand it off to Jeff Lemire, who's going to kind of give an overview of the pilot program, I wanted to thank Kristen, our Director of Community Services, Darren, we all know Darren, and by the way, Darren, I was impressed by your department report. There's a lot going on, and you've spent many, many hours trying to corral this particular topic and come up with a sensible proposal with us, and so it's much appreciated given everything that's on your plate. Darren's team, Lam Do, who's our superintendent of parks, Kathleen Jones, the supervising ranger, Greg Betts, the former CSD director, Kurt Dunn, former supervisor and ranger at Foothills Park, Gordon Bailey, Lester Hendry, other former supervising rangers at Foothills Park, and John Aiken and his team at the JMZ, and many others who have provided input to this particular pilot proposal. So with that.
Thank you, Ryan. And again, thanks to Darren and everyone who helped out and provided comment. We received a lot of public comment. There were a lot of current and past rangers interviewed. There were a lot of people that we spoke to about this, and there was a lot of time and thought put into this pilot proposal. I'm just going to go through briefly each of these points and make a brief comment, and Ryan will follow up, providing some comment on some data that we have. But to reiterate what Ryan has said and what others have spoke about is we understand how unique and how special this place is. We also think that there's, based on looking at the historical data, based on speaking with the rangers and other people, that there's also an opportunity to share our amazing resource in a responsible manner with a few more people. And I think that's something that this pilot proposal will attempt to do. The first point is the fact that it's a one-year program. It's a temporary program. This is not a permanent program, and it's something that implemented will allow study. It's a limited number of adjustable passes for non-residents, meaning that we can adjust based on if we think it's going to be a busy day. Historically, if Mother's Day has been busy, maybe there will not be non-resident passes available for that day, as an example. We also want to make it a point to have broader availability for school field trips. We think that the real core of getting school-aged children out to the park, the educational value of the environment is of great importance to us, and we think that that can really help out different communities, not just those students at Palo Alto, but to really push that is important to us. In the interest of simplicity, that one thing we were looking at with this pilot program was not to engage city staff to reduce the time that they would need to spend on something like this. And so we want to use the new online reservation portal that will be available this fall. And this is a portal that is would be used as anybody would make a reservation, as people sign up for different things through the city. So people could log on to this. We also believe that people have technological accessibility that's more and more, whether it's through their smartphones or a computer. But we want to make it accessible, and we want to make it simple also for staff to help out people who are seeking the passes. We'll have an opportunity to collect data, and so we can understand how many people are going into the park. And that's extremely important, as was mentioned by a previous speaker, and also Ryan will drill down a little bit deeper on the data. But as we collect this data, it's going to help us understand what are the impacts on the park that this proposal has resulted in. As we mentioned before about the field trips, we do want to formalize a school field trip program, which is not presently anticipated by the municipal code. And, again, codifying these existing practices will provide clarity for those involved. And, so that would be one more point of this pilot proposal. There's also some potential to recover expenses associated with the existing cost of staffing the entry gate. So the entry gate is currently staffed on weekends, so there's already a cost involved in that. And there is potential for discussion if we charge a certain amount for passes, that money could be recouped and provided towards the existing expenses of the park. And we'll continue to prioritize resident access. There's no changes to the current resident access proposed in this. So any current resident would still have the same rights to go visit the park. And that's, very important that is understood, that we're not limiting what already exists. And again, the proposal that we're making is very limited in scope, but will provide us with information about how the park is being used and will help us develop proposals and, hopefully something to push forward in the future. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan and let him drill down more on this data and speak a little bit more about this.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to try to be efficient because I know that there's a lot of charts here included in this relatively short PowerPoint presentation, but nevertheless, charts and these numbers could be a little bit hard to read. By the way, and for the members of the public, my apologies that these numbers might be difficult to see, but I have a couple of copies in case any commission members would like to have a slightly better view of what's on the screen here. But again, let me be as brief as I possibly can be in talking about the numbers. So, as Jeff mentioned, the number of passes anticipated by this pilot would be adjusted on a daily basis or a weekly basis by staff to match the historical trends in the data. with an upper cap of 50 passes on any given day. So at our July meeting, Darren presented a number of numbers for the past decade with trend lines and monthly averages. And so happy to recirculate those materials if anyone would like to see them. But as a quick recap, the top line numbers from that presentation were that in the past couple of decades, we've had a very stable rate of usage, around 150,000 visitors per year. Looking back over the park's more than 50-year history, that level of visitation is actually fairly low. So in the first decade after the park's dedication, through the 1960s and 70s, the visitation count was regularly in the upper 200,000 and 300,000s. So we're historically low compared to what the park saw when it opened. Turning your attention to the slide that's on the screen now, I want to quickly just kind of provide an overview of this to try and hopefully orient you to the type of data that we have available to us and how we can use that data, I hope, to tailor the best policy here with this pilot. So on the far left-hand side, you'll see visitation broken out by month. This is all for the year 2017. And not surprisingly, the months of May, June, and July have elevated rates of visitation. It then tapers off in the fall. It drops to its lowest level over the winter months, and it picks up, ramps up kind of at a gradual basis in the spring until you hit summer again when you're at your peak. So no surprise, the summer months are the most popular. For 2017, the staff has been doing this for a long while, but for 2017, they recorded that they actually turned away over 3,700 non-residents who came to the park. So folks who came to the park on a weekend and were hoping to visit, but they were turned away because they're not residents. That number equates to, as you'll see, reflected in the monthly numbers there, it's anywhere between 220 to more than 500 people per month that were turned away in 2017. That number has been inching up over the years. So in the past 5 years, I believe the average was something like 2,800. So you see that in more recent years, we are turning away more people than we were 5 years ago, for example. So then if you go to the far right-hand side, you see a breakdown by day of the week. Again, not surprisingly, Saturday and Sunday are more popular. They amount to about 50% of the total visitation in the park, and the other days of the week make up the other 50%.
One question here.
Yep,
the non-residents, is that the number of people in the car, or is that the number of cars? And the fourth column, non-residents turnaways, is that in the number of cars that were turned away or the number of non-residents?
That's a question for Darren.
I believe it's the number of non-residents.
Okay, thank you. And also, it's manned on weekends. Weekdays, do we count the cars? Do we have an
Yes, we've got a counter, electronic counter.
And then we just multiply by
2.7.
2.7, okay, thank you.
Yep, those are both great questions.
Does that include my dog? During the week only?
And the turnaway number, is that based on cars times 2.7 or actual people?
The turn away number is, if we're turning away, I think they're counting those people. So that's, of course, they're there in the booth. So yeah, they're getting a real count.
Yeah, and so Keith, relatedly, a good point is that these total numbers reflect both the visitors counted by the car multiplier during the week, as well as perhaps, at 7 o'clock in the morning before the ranger opens up the ranger station on a Saturday morning, right? And then in addition to that, it also counts everyone that the ranger in the booth is counting as they go through, right? So it's a combination of all three of those sources. Here, all that we're trying to demonstrate and hopefully make this slightly more visually appealing or intuitive is the number of visitors are reflected in the blue part of the bars. If we were to have 1,000 people per day, it would be the green bar. So you would have 30,000 people approximately per month. And you can see what the current level of visitation is. One slight clarification that'll make is that it's not actually a 1,000 person per day limit. It's 1,000 persons at any one time in the park is the cap. So, conceivably, you could have 2,000 people visit the park and not actually hit that 1,000 person at any time cap. But in all events, we thought it was kind of a benchmark to demonstrate what that would look like. This is something that would be close to the level of visitation in the 1970s when we had 370,000 people visiting the park for several years. So if you were at that level, you'd be at where the top of the green bar is. This one demonstrates essentially the red bar difference, which would be if you added 20% over the current visitation for 2017, where you would be relative to 1,000 people per day. And this one, if you added 70%. So I'm going to break this down slightly more to month, and so of course those monthly numbers are made up of daily numbers. And I think that this is a somewhat helpful example. Just looking at January of 2017, January typically a low month for the park. January 1st, though, is typically a pretty popular day in the park. It's New Year's Day. A lot of people have New Year's resolutions that they're trying to keep on that first day, and they make it out to Foothills Park. So on that day, we have 300 cars in 2017 and 750 visitors who are registered by the ranger staff as they enter. So that would be a day, for example, where we would probably have fewer passes available, potentially significantly fewer. Perhaps there's only 10 or 20 passes available on New Year's Day. But then if you look at the other days, excuse me, I've been speaking too much today. If you look at the other days, you'll see that the car counts can actually be quite interesting. So there's several weekends here. If you look at January 8th of 2017, there were only 53 cars that entered the park that day and 133 visitors. I have fairly high confidence in the numbers for weekends, by the way, because it's actually, for the most part, recorded by a ranger who's standing there at the booth. And it's not to suggest that I don't have confidence in the other numbers, but as anyone who works with lots of data sets will know, and I know that several of you do this more than I do, there are always blips in the data. And so, if we look down to Thursday, January 26th of 2017, there were 356 people who visited the park based on our automatic counter. That number seems high to me, frankly. I'm surprised that there were 200 cars that entered the park that day. However, it's certainly possible, right? It's also possible that there were deer that passed by the photo eye that counts the vehicles or something like that as well, right? So there's a number of different things that could be happening. But the great thing is that we have so much data. We have 20 years of very reliable data, and we have more data beyond that, that those blips start to become essentially not meaningful, right? You have so much information that you're able to make decisions based on this data set in its entirety or in its more complete nature. Excuse me again. So here are a number of additional ways of thinking about this again. So the red bars reflect if you were to have 1,000 people visit the park on a day. And the blue bars reflect the actual visitation during the month of January. So we then did the same thing for June of 2010. And you'll see in a couple slides, we did the same thing for November of 2014. June and November tend to be higher usage months, where we see more visitors to the park, as you'd expect. And so again, here's the graphical charting of what those levels are versus 1,000 people in the park per day. Same for November. Here's November with the additional 25% people visiting the park.
What was that, on Tuesday, the 11th?
Veterans Day. It was Veterans Day.
Oh, really? You had-
For some reason, I suspect that there was a special event or something.
Yep, exactly. So certainly there are days where we could be coming close to having 1,000 people in the park, but the purpose of the pilot is to give staff the flexibility to adjust and prevent a circumstance where that would happen.
I mean, so how would staff go about doing that? And that, would it be 50 for most days, and then just on holidays we would lower it down, or would you be modifying it? For example, if you go back and you look on Tuesdays and say Tuesdays are higher, so we're only going to have 45 that day, or vice versa, you know? I guess, how often would they adjust that 50?
So two things I think to keep in mind. One is that part of the purpose of the pilot is to experiment a bit, right? And I think in the first instance, Darren would likely experiment on the conservative side. And I'll let Darren kind of speak to what his thoughts are on that, but essentially ensure that we don't have a huge crowd of people who are joining the park. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think everyone else appreciates that Councilman Cormack got me this water too. Thank you, though. So that's thought number one, is to experiment a bit. And that's also true as we get to this next slide about options for further discussion, how we experiment within this set of 50 passes we might have. So to look at days of the week, I think would be meaningful. I think it would also be meaningful, though, you know, probably for Darren and his staff at the beginning of a month to look at the trends, right, for the next couple of months and say, here's where we think we need to adjust and have a smaller pool of passes available on some weekends, some days, et cetera. So this last slide, there are a number of areas where it would be helpful for the committee to receive some more feedback from the commission, one of which is on the topic of fees. So Darren's team, Kathleen Jones, got together with her ranger staff and came up with a calculation of the cost to staff the booth over the weekends. And it's a fairly significant cost from my perspective. It cost the city about $89,000 in staffing time to have the entry gate manned just on the weekends. So one thing to consider is, do we want to try and recoup some costs that would be associated with that staffing? For me personally, I'm kind of torn on this issue. I totally appreciate the point of trying to recoup some of the fees. By the same token, I don't want to create an additional barrier to entry for folks, and so that would lead me to think that perhaps we should not charge a fee, and maybe there's a hybrid of sorts, and this would be something appropriate for a pilot, I think, would be to have a phase where we don't have a fee, perhaps for the first half of the pilot, and for the second half of the pilot to have a fee that might be charged. So your input on fees would be helpful. The second point here would be, what do we do about weekdays? So the committee had in mind that it would make sense to try and collect as much data as we could on weekdays, and so we should encourage people to go online and make a reservation, grab one of these passes for weekdays as well as weekends, recognizing that many people will not do that, but all the more information that we can get would be helpful. And when people go through the online reservation portal, they'll probably be answering 2 or 3, 4 questions about the reason they're going to the park and whatnot, just for our data collection purposes, so we can understand how the park is being used and hopefully collect that helpful data. So fees and weekdays are 2 big areas where we would definitely like the commission's input. Discussion about further prioritization for students and volunteers. The committee definitely wants to prioritize access for those groups. there's a couple ways that we thought about it. One is to provide a fee waiver in the event that there is a fee charged. So we would provide essentially an access code to those groups when they go online to make a reservation. Excuse me. The second would be to set aside a certain number of passes only for students and volunteers. And then any other alternatives and ideas that you have. And with that, I'm going to stop speaking because you'll all appreciate me not coughing at you. So thank you again for your indulgence. And Darren, very sincerely, thank you for all of your assistance.
So there's 3 members of the ad hoc. Jeff was the other ad hoc member, so in normal procedure, we should allow him to speak first.
Thank you. I want to thank the ad hoc members who worked so hard on this, along with lots of contributions from staff and Darren. Kudos, especially as always. I'd like to thank the public speakers for their thoughtful comments. I am interested in hearing from staff at some point what our plans or our policy is regarding closing Foothills Park on fire danger days, especially understanding that the neighboring open space areas like Windy Hill and Huddard and Wunderlich are already instituting a similar policy. It seems like we want to make sure we're consistent with them. I appreciate this is a complex issue, and it's been a long-standing issue in the community. So I'm particularly interested in hearing from the other commissioners your thoughts on this, and I look at it with 3 different areas of focus. One is the clarity of scope of what we're proposing. 2 is the simplicity, and 3 is focusing on minimizing impacts. So on the scope, are our priorities correct? Is it clear what problem we're trying to solve? And is it clear that the proposal addresses the priority issues? Simplicity, is our plan simple to communicate? Is it simple to understand? And is it simple to implement? And regarding minimizing impacts, this includes staff time, cost to the city, impacts to the current user experience, and of course the impacts to the natural environment. So that's really what feedback I'm interested in hearing on top of the specific points that Ryan has highlighted. Thank you.
So I'll start with Keith, if you don't mind being first.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think this is a good idea. Like most people, have some reservations. Darren, I mean, we heard a lot of speakers last month that were very concerned that both from a wildlife standpoint and also losing the charm of the Foothills Park. How are we going to be monitoring the condition of the park to ensure that this is not affecting the park?
I think what we've started with now is starting to track some baselines. I think that's the most reasonable. A lot of them can be a little arbitrary, so we're hoping to find ways to make them less so. For example, photographs are often helpful. There's only so much we can track and the amount of time of ranger time we could dedicate this, but we thought perhaps taking random photos of the same shot of the valley in front of the interpretive center to see how many deer are out there, for example. We'd track incidents of vandalism and other things that require staff time, cut off trails, that kind of thing. We have a rough idea, but we're going to track it more closely now, and then we'd have some baseline data that we'd continue to track during the pilot. The amount of time we spend cleaning restrooms, reports of restrooms not being tidy, things like that.
What about erosion on some of the trails, especially on the steep hills?
Yeah, I think our rangers have a good understanding. A lot of those are not necessarily visitor-driven. Some of them are environmentally driven, as you remember, with the big storms. But some of it can be, and certainly shortcuts that contribute to erosion. We've got some problem areas in the park that we do track. So I think certainly that's one of the things we pay attention to. Eyeballs on the creek to see if people are down in the creek and any impacts there.
Are there any areas that you're concerned about? If, for example, let's say we doubled the number of people at Foothills Park, what would be your biggest concern quality-wise from the park?
I think the parking would be a challenge. The group picnic, the first come, first served picnic area could be impacted if we doubled the number. And I think that's one of the things I like about this pilot is the ability to perhaps have some control over those by adjusting the number of passes we give out so that doesn't happen. But those are some of my worry areas. Impacts to wildlife, of course. I think those are probably the biggest ones.
And so, if, for example, looking at the deer, is there some way, Shawnee mentioned the birds, is there any way that you can quantify the bird population? Is that just too hard to do?
I think one of the better ways that we could reasonably implement something like that is to do more of the bio blitzes and citizen science, where you go out and you have members of the public help and they're tracking things and recording. Those are most valuable when you have a lot of them in a row consecutively over a long period of time. On the shorter scale, I think some of those might be a little less valuable. They're not really indicative of everything you've got. You've got to have it over a lengthy period of time, I think. But that might be one way to help with that.
Okay. We're talking about Ravenswood or Palo Alto Unified. Do we have a count of how many students are in Ravenswood and count of how many non-residents are in Palo Alto schools?
I don't have the number of non-residents in the Palo Alto schools. I understand it's fairly low from anecdotal conversations with PUSD staff, but I don't have a number. And the ad hoc might have had conversations with Ravenswood to understand the number, but I don't know.
Yeah, forgive me, I don't have the number off the top of my head. We did some calculations, though, around the number of students in Ravenswood and the number of students in PAUSD who are not resident of Palo Alto. So those calculations, though, were primarily related to an iteration of the pilot, or a pilot that we've now stepped away from, which was essentially just giving access to all PAUSD students and all Ravenswood students without having any daily cap. So under this pilot proposal, you would have essentially 125 or 135, I can't remember the exact number, additional visitors per day based on a cap of 50 passes. So the question would then be, do we want to set aside 10 of those passes only for students and 10 of those passes only for volunteers, perhaps?
Yeah, I thought that was a good idea to separate those. Some of the logistics of how to get these passes. We talked about online reservations. Do we have that up and running? Do you know?
Yeah, we have an existing online system that's in the process of being replaced right now with a newer, more robust system. It'll be activated December of this year. And we've inquired if something like what we're looking at in this pilot might be feasible, and they've said yes.
Okay, so it would start in December.
That's right.
Okay. And how would we work that? Would it be, you could make it 24 hours in advance, or could you make it a week in advance? I mean, one of the concerns I have is twofold. One is if I have to wait to the last minute to make my reservation and don't know if I'm going to get one of those spots, then I can't make my plans. But also if you allow people to make a month ahead of time, now if I decide I want to go, now it's all blocked up for the next month. And so both of those are bad situations. So what would be our policy? Would we be able to take reservations ahead of time, or would we not?
I think, yes, it would be ahead of time. The fine-tuning of exactly when or how much in advance, yet to be determined. I think we'd discuss it with the ad hoc and come with a proposal to the commission.
And would there be a limit to the number of passes one person could have? For example, could someone sign up and take a pass every day for the next month?
Right. I don't know that that's been discussed with the ad hoc yet. Another detail to work on.
Because if this is a scarce resource, what happens is people will hoard scarce resources and try and sell it on the secondary market. So that I would be concerned that there might be some shenanigans going on. The reason I was asking about how many students we have is I like the idea of setting aside some of the passes for students and some of the passes for volunteers, and what is the right proportion. And if we have a lot of students in Ravenswood that might be interested in it, I don't know if 10 would be enough. So I want to look at those numbers to say what would be a reasonable allocation for the Ravenswood PAUSD students. Okay. And fees. The online reservations, we could charge fees if we wanted.
That's correct.
I'm not sure about fees. I understand your comments and appreciate them. I'm not sure the right answer. I would probably be inclined to charge fees. For example, Huddard, if you go to Huddard Park right now, it's a $6 parking. I would think it'd be reasonable for us to at least charge that much, just to be an equal footing. I think that's all my questions for now.
And you have questions?
Excuse me. No, not really questions, but just a few comments. Before I start, I think there are about a little bit less than 4,000 children in Ravenswood School District. I think that's kind of the number that's current. So I would just say that, first of all, I'm really glad to see this and see that we're discussing this. We've been talking about it off and on for a long time. I've been a resident of Palo Alto for a long time, and it comes and it goes and it comes and it goes. And I really congratulate the ad hoc and the staff and the community, because this is a really thoughtful discussion, a really cautious and careful and data-driven discussion. I think that's really, really, really important. I want to say that I appreciate the neighbors from Portola Valley and the comments about closing Foothill Park and other places for fire, high fire danger and everything. I think that was really great and something that I necessarily wouldn't have thought out. But I'd like to just go back to the reason that this came up, about the fairness and the justice of this. And I really think that we in Palo Alto have to figure out a way that the Foothill Park is not closed to people. And I know that you can walk in now and all of that, but it just doesn't feel right to me to live in a community that has a park that is closed in some sense. So I'm excited to see this move forward. There's a lot of questions and a lot of details that we're going to have to answer, and staff is going to have to figure out the answers to, but I think it's really the right thing to do. And certainly think about kids who don't have the opportunity to get out to Foothill Park. How are we going to ask them to take care of the environment in the future and care about it if they don't have a chance to see it? So I think that's going to be a really important thing. So thank you all very much for the work that you've done on this, and it'll be really interesting to track this through the year, and hopefully we get to do that and see how it works out. Jeff, I'm not sure that I addressed any of your questions, but I think the scope is okay right now. I mean, I think it's pretty thoughtful, and I think it'll be a good test. So thanks very much.
Jeff, do you have any other comments you'd like to make? Jeff, do you want to answer your own questions?
No, I don't have anything specific to add. I think they stand on their own, and I think the questions are key to making sure we're on the right track for proposing an effective pilot program.
So I would like to comment on a number of things. I hope in the context of Jeff's questions, and I would add my thank you again to people who spoke, the effort of the ad hoc, and particularly Ryan. I think that he's championed the fact that we're having this discussion, and I think we're having a reasoned discussion, and I just applaud everybody for that. The thing I would say that, let me say, the question of how this goes next, we can take this to council with a recommendation that they simply change the municipal code, or we can go to council and ask that we have a joint discussion session. I think there needs to be a consideration of what the right next step is so that we continue this. In the context of that, particularly relative to impact and simplicity, as Jeff mentioned, I would suggest, number one, that we just accept that it is 1,000 a day. Instead of saying it's 1,000 at any one time or whatever, if we say it's 1,000 a day, then that minimizes the impact. It's easier to keep track of. We don't need to worry about how many went in and how many went out and whatever. We can just say it's 1,000 a day. And all of those charts basically say we're 25% of 1,000 a day right now. So we're a long way away from filling 1,000 a day, let alone 1,000 at any one time. So I would say include it in the conversation. We make sure it's clear on that. I believe that anything we do should include a comment about not just closing the park on fire hazard, but other safety issues. I think a well-reasoned approach to safety should be included. I think that fees are good. I think we should embrace fees. I'm not sure how you would go through the phases that you're talking about. My phase would be fees right up front. And the idea that, like Environmental Volunteers does for schools that can't afford it, if you put on your reservation system, I'd like to apply for a scholarship to get into the park. I kind of doubt that people who could afford to pay would say, oh shit, I can get away with not paying just by doing this. And that would be part of our testing of, if we simply allowed people to apply for a waiver online and gave it automatically, would everybody claim the waiver or not? So I would say do that. In terms of prioritizing, I think you've had some clear conversations about if it's 1,000 a day, then let's make sure that after we get to 600, 700, 800 or whatever, that at that point we maintain the prioritization for Palo Alto citizens. That may be in here, but I'm not sure that I saw that in the concept. In terms of collecting data, I think that this is going to be a really interesting thing relative to. You don't have to have all the data, you just have to have some good samples. And I know that, I think Darren talked about this before, or maybe Kathleen mentioned it or something. If we just start counting the rolls of toilet paper now, and then we eventually know that we're using 25 times as the the amount of toilet paper or something, there must be some indicators, not hard facts but good leading indicators, not just trailing indicators that we could look at. I think the idea of having bioblitzes, they're not perfect, and part of this is back to Shanice's point earlier. You don't necessarily need to count the deer and the birds. Maybe you just need to count the insects. And maybe you don't need to count all the insects. You just need to count particular insects. Because if you're not keeping track of that, then you can't sustain the birds or whatever. So maybe we can do some focused BioBlitz stuff, and we certainly know a few people who are really good at insect BioBlitzes. So I would consider that. I would think that how quickly shortcuts get, visitor-created paths. That's at Point Lobos in particular, that was the biggest effort. The biggest cost when it came time to say, we've never had fences, time to put up fences, was the amount of visitor-created paths. And I think as long as we're doing that, and the idea of visitor-created paths takes me back to, maybe I was going to save this for later, but I'll say it now. We need to look at this, is this a park or is this a reserve? And what kind of park do we want it to be? So for example, when I look at this, and I think about passes, do I want to apply for a pass to go for a hike? Or do I want to apply for a pass to use a fire pit? And I think maybe we need to be a little more granular in our thinking here, that you can have 12 fire pit passes every day, period. Keith's point of, yeah, but if you allow those to be booked a year ahead of time, then the first thing I'm going to do is go book my whole year's worth of fire pits or something like that. Well, there are state parks that have passes. There's other regional parks that have passes that have you pay for. There's got to be an awful lot of learning out there that we don't have to start from a blank sheet of paper, that we can figure out what do they do. Point Lobos does not have passes at this point. They're considering passes. Most other state parks have restrictions, and the first thing they did was say, let's go find out what everybody else is doing. And I think there's some research we could do from there. But I hear Keith's question, but I think all of that is absolutely manageable. The reservation logistics, there's just got to be a way to do that. And I think that making it simple, even my suggestion of complicating it by saying, I need to know whether you want a fire pit pass or whatever. And then, by the way, if you want to talk about if it's a reserve or reserve-like versus park, maybe in the process of this, we should eliminate the fire pits. I mean, back to, are we being hypocritical here? Do we believe in nature, but we want people in nature, but we want them to have fires or whatever? That we need to think about. Can people have picnics without cooking hot dogs? And I think that I think that maybe I'm making this take longer, but I think we should think about that. I think Shani shook her head when I said bioblitzes, but I also think that there's a possibility that we could go to somebody like Audubon and actually give them a contract to do some measurement. I think that wouldn't hurt. When we talk about Ravenswood, I'm not sure we need to necessarily talk about the whole Ravenswood School District, as opposed to what grades are we talking about, and is it just 1 through 6, or is it all grades or whatever? I truly believe in the online reservation system. If the one that we're putting in place as a city doesn't work, there's so many commercial online reservation systems that could be used. I think it makes no sense. It's just not worrying about it. The bottom line for me, I think this absolutely should go forward. I totally believe in opening the park, and I believe that, and I share concerns about nature, but I also have concerns about people. And being in nature is good for people, and we should not limit the opportunity for people to experience nature and enjoy nature and learn about nature. And again, Shani's idea that if we could get docent volunteers or whatever to talk to people, to staff the center there, that should all be part of this if we can do it. But bottom line, I totally support the idea that we should open this. So again, Ryan, thank you. I'd give a chance for anybody to make any additional comments, but otherwise, I want to thank you again for all good comments. You have a rebuttal?
Just a couple comments. One clarification, Ravenswood School District is K through 8.
Yeah.
They do not have a high school. We've talked about barbecues in Foothills Park and some of the hillside picnic areas, and maybe we should move forward with considering removing consider which barbecues should be removed from some picnic areas. Maybe we scale back and only include them in Orchard Glen and Oak Grove. Maybe there's another site, but some of the more remote sites that have the barbecues seem like a problem waiting to happen. And then just one question to re-ask to the commission is, and I haven't heard any specific input on, regarding weekdays. Should the Pilot Pass program be extended to weekdays or not? Do you have any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Do you have a comment on that, or?
Well, the committee's thinking was we should collect as much information as we can, and to the extent that we can get people to go obtain one of these passes online for a weekday, let's try and collect that information and know who's visiting the park, when they're visiting it, et cetera, et cetera. That said, we recognize, I think, that there may not be a lot of adherence to that sort of policy, and so, maybe it's not a meaningful data point for that reason, and so it really is an open question for us, I think. And I think Councilwoman Cormack has a thought.
I had a thought too, but I wasn't sure whether I was going to go ahead. Councilmember Cormack, please.
If everyone has concluded their comments, I want to be sure I go at the very end.
I've decided I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
All righty, thank you. I want to echo former council member Cordell's statement that this is a thoughtful first step to bring one of our parks into the 21st century. Earlier this year, when we were setting up the study session, the question that I asked when this particular subject was brought up is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And if I turn to page 2 and I think about all of the data that the subcommittee has provided, I have to say I'm shocked. I would not have known, and I certainly wouldn't have expected that we turn away thousands of people every year from the park. So to me, that's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think what this pilot does is part 1 addresses that, and then part 2, and part of that, if we go back even earlier in the year to the mayor's State of the City speech, one of the things he spoke about was being a good neighbor. I think this is, utterly and completely consistent with that. The second part with respect to students, Ms. Kleinhaus and I were down at the county earlier today providing input on the Stanford General Use Permit to the supervisors. And I was struck by the comments of another person whose name I did not catch, who described the fact that people evolved in the natural habitat, right, environment. We evolved, our neurological systems evolved, not in an environment like this, but in a natural one. And I think about the book Last Child in the Woods, and I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to make this special place more broadly available to students, and doing that through, school field trips, I think is exactly the right way to start and test. Not going to weigh in on the fees, and people can have a variety of ways of thinking about that, and I anticipate the committee will keep working on that and thinking about it. I would just say, all of us have to be mindful about where the staff has operational control and where we, sitting on the dais, design programs. And as I listen to some of the conversation, we'd just be mindful of the level of detail. We want to be sure, especially if it's a pilot, to not prescribe it so carefully that staff can't adjust, especially if there are different days, et cetera. And then just as people were thinking about all the details, now I'm going to go back and provide one, which is, I know the libraries have you reserve a room like a few days in advance, 3 or 4 or 5 days in advance, right? And I think there's a limit on how many you can do in a week. That's all utterly manageable. And I remember in the consent calendar item not too long ago, I had posed a question or two about this new reservation system. It sounds fantastic. I think it's going to give us a lot of capabilities. So what I'll close with is the sincere thanks to staff who has spent an extraordinary amount of time researching not just the history, but the data, and thinking so carefully about, how this might affect the space and people's experience there. And I want to, sincerely thank the ad hoc subcommittee who is tackling something that has been a difficult topic for many years and has done so thoughtfully.
So, thank you.
And if
that's Ryan's trick, just
I'm
one
sorry.
more thought.
This is really just personal. I just have to say that, for many years I sat where former council member Cordell is when she was up here. And now I want you to know that every Thursday night I think of you, because I remember when you left, you said, may you, to the names of the people, may you never darken my door again. Every Thursday night when my packet arrives, I think of you. I just want you to know that. So someone else's door is being darkened, and I always thank you, and certainly former Mayor Levy, for your service, as I'm more aware of what it entails.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I can't thank enough the I think, reasoned conversation that we've had. So I think if there is nothing else, I'd give Ryan a chance to close if you want. But I think we need to explore the next step. And I think the committee needs to work with staff to figure out how we move this forward. I personally think there is momentum to continue the conversation. I would like to see the ad hoc come back to the next commission meeting rather than putting it off. I'd like to encourage that.
I'm going to save my breath and save Keith from being coughed upon. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate the input.
With that, thank you very much. And so I'd like to move on to the next item on the agenda. The next item is other ad hoc and liaison updates. I have not seen, probably my mistake, the ad hoc input. And I'll give people anybody a chance to ask questions on the ad hoc input or add to the ad hoc input. Keith?
I'll just have one quick note. Yeah, I came in late today because we had a North Ventura meeting over at the library. Last month, it came up again, the naturalization of that stream. Does Peter have any bandwidth to give us a presentation on naturalizing that stream by Fry's in Boulevard Park?
We can certainly discuss it. It might be a little broader than just Peter. It would no doubt involve planning and other departments as well, but we can certainly talk to him about it.
Okay, just because the Santa Clara Valley Water District does have money to help with that kind of thing. So that, especially like Boulevard Park with that concrete channel going through it, if we could have a sloping down into the stream, that could be a plus.
If I may, we have authorized a contract on consent, I believe it was last week, about $93,000 to a consultant who's going to study 3 options there. So that work is underway.
Oh, really?
Yes.
For naturalizing by Boulevard Park?
Naturalizing was one option. Another is, yes, they're looking at what is possible there.
Oh, that's very good. I had not heard that. Thank you.
I'm just your local consent calendar reader here.
How's that for real-time response? That was great. I would like to, since it's liaison, take the opportunity to thank Ann for showing up at the ice cream socials. It made the 3 or 4 hours that we were there much better, and I'd really like to thank the Snake. The Snake provided all of the good work. It was well done. The other liaison update I would add is I have met with Councilmember Cormack for a brief discussion of fundraising and some efforts there, and I've also talked to Darren about some other approaches to fundraising. I promised to meet you with you this week, and I failed, and I'll make sure I set a meeting for next week, because I do have a pretty good spreadsheet and input to work from. If there's nothing else from that, I would like to discuss not just the agenda, but the schedule for the October and November, December meetings. The October meeting is clearly okay on the 22nd of October, so that wouldn't change. We sent out a note saying, could we look at November 12th, which is, I guess, 3 weeks later, not 4 weeks later. I counted the 29th twice. And I guess we could make that 12th or the 19th. And then I was recommending the 10th of December on the basis that the 17th is that week prior to Christmas, when people get caught up in all sorts of other events. And so working back from the 10th, do I have any comments, inputs on those?
I think 10th and 19th would be good combinations, or 10 or 12, yeah. For November, I'm happy with 12 or 19, and December 10th. So.
Okay, so can we agree on December 10th? Anybody have any objection? Okay, we're having December 10th.
I think I do have a problem. Just hold on a minute. Nope, it's okay.
Okay, so if we can stick with the 10th, 12th or 19th. I prefer the 12th, but I'm flexible, of November.
Either is fine for me.
Jeff? Keith, you're okay with that?
I'm okay with either one.
Jeff?
Mild preference for 19th, but I can go either way.
I may be traveling, but I don't know yet.
When would you know?
2 weeks.
Go ahead and do
So
it.
why don't we say 12th or 19th, and we'll give you the 10 days, 2 weeks to figure that out. And we'll nail it down later, okay? So we've got the December one set, we've got 2 potential dates for November. Thank you for that. Better with the 12th.
And so are we clear that we're not going to be meeting on the 26th
Of,
November?
yes.
Okay, that seemed implicit, but.
Chair, may I
Yes.
make a point?
Yeah.
Just wanted to point out, for our October meeting, this room's not available. Instead, we'll be at the downtown
Yes.
library.
It's in the library, yes. I think we should.
While we're on that topic, I will not be in attendance at this October meeting because I will be here for the Stanford General Use Permit evening.
Which
Right.
starts at
Discussion.
6, though, doesn't it?
It does start
So
at
we can all
6.
come at 6 and then go to our meeting.
There you go.
If you're
Yeah.
interested.
I think the meeting, when we can't have it here, we should have it in a park somewhere.
Around the fire pit.
Yeah, around a fire pit.
Chairman.
Darren's ignoring us at this point. I think we should move on.
That or I'll get an LED fire for you. How about that?
May I add something about Rinconada, please?
Yes?
Okay, so Carol McPherson will be retiring at the end of the year.
Right.
And Rinconada Masters would like to have a party for her. And I think it probably would be very well attended because there's so many people from so many years. So they're looking now at the Elks Club at December the 10th, and they would like very much to extend an invitation to all the commissioners. So consider yourselves invited. And then I offered to work with Kristen or somebody in the clerk's office or Darren or anybody who can help with a proclamation. I can do the information and the form, and then you all, if you would bless it, that would be great, to do something in her honor.
And did you say December 10th?
I said December 10th.
So is that
No, I didn't. I said December 8th. Sorry, I looked at my wrong notes. December the 8th, Sunday the 8th.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any pressing topics that we should put on the agenda for the October meeting?
Don, one note, I will not be available on November 19th.
On the 19th, okay. So if, that would say we have a preference for the 12th, right? And if you can let us know, that would.
So I should be available on the 12th?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's what you're saying, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you go back to agenda topics? Is there a time to get a Coverly update, or am I just not aware of what's going on right now?
That's a great question. I had asked Department Head O'Kane, and she wasn't available to provide me the latest and greatest, so it'll certainly be in the department report at the October meeting.
That would be
Or
great.
if you want something sooner, perhaps we
No,
can
it's
arrange.
okay.
Okay.
There was just a part in the weekly that yesterday that I had no knowledge of, and I thought maybe
It's the latest, sure.
be good to know.
So we'll have community gardens next month, I believe.
And if possible, the horizontal levy update for Public Works.
And based on the safe parking or safe park conversation, I would suggest that we consider an update on the 10.5 acres. Whether that comes through the ad hoc or whatever, but I think that needs to be considered. And that's 4 or 5 items that would probably more than fill up a meeting, and so we need to sort that out. Let's see. So I assume that all comments and announcements have been made, and unless there's something else, I would invite adjournment.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.